Seongmin Ahn, who lives in Brooklyn, has been featured in 2 other exhibitions at the Hudson River Museum, Women to the Fore and Order Reorder, with a work from her Aphrodisiac series, which we have acquired for the collection. She was born in South Korea, and in her art, she combines traditional Korean painting techniques with contemporary subject matter to express her personal journey to discover a sense of home as an artist bridging Eastern and Western cultures. She holds an MFA in Asian traditional painting from Seoul National University and an MFA in multidisciplinary art from Maryland Institute College of Art. She's gained favorable attention in both the New York and East Asian art scenes, exhibiting at the Charles Wang Center at Stony Brook University, the Jordan Snitzer Museum of Art at the University of Oregon, and the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, Korea. John Yau is a professor of critical studies at Mason Gross School of the Arts, a part of Rutgers University. He was the editor for the Brooklyn Rail and currently writes for Hypoallergic. He has published books of poetry, fiction, and criticism, including monographs on Jasper Johns, Andy Warhol, and A.R. Pink. In 1999, he started Black Square Editions, a small press devoted to poetry, fiction, translation, and criticism. In 2018, John was a recipient of the Jackson Poetry Prize. He has received numerous other awards and grants, including from the Creative Capital Warhol Foundation, the Academy of American Poets, the American Poetry Review, the Ingram Merrill Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Foundation for the Arts, the General Electric Foundation, the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, and the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. There might be a few other granting organizations that we have not mentioned, but you seem to have hit them all. So I'm so honored to have you here. And before we get started, I just wanted to show a couple of slides to orient you to why we are always at the Hudson River Museum thinking about flowers and the Victorian language of flowers that led up to Edward Steichen's art, and also eventually going on and on to contemporary artists using flowers. I picture here chrysanthemums and sunflowers, because if you walk through Glenview, you will see examples of these flowers. In fact, I've done a lot of research trying to figure out if they are sunflowers or if they are chrysanthemums. And as you can see, they have a wide variety of symbolism, connected to them. From one Victorian book to another, they'll all be a little bit different. And then if you go in Glenview and you take one of the tours, you will see some examples of these flowers. And in a lot of cases, like the wallpaper from our parlor there, which I do think is chrysanthemums, that is influenced by a lot of English decorative arts that were coming over to the United States in the mid-1870s. And then the one on the bottom here, which is marquetry from our library, very definitely influenced by Asian arts, like lacquer boxes and lacquer furniture, that kind of a contrast between the light woods and the dark woods. And there's a lot of stylization that goes on into these flowers that is also influenced by Asian art. So I'm just really interested for you to hear more about what Seongmin has to say about her own flowers. And Mr. Trevor, John Trevor, who built Glenview Mansion, grew chrysanthemums. And this is a picture of the chrysanthemums in his greenhouse, which is one reason that I have embarked on that research project, to figure out if maybe the architect built him a house full of chrysanthemums. Now, the other exhibition that we were mentioning by Edward Steichen that is across the atrium from Seongmin's show is called Edward Steichen in Exaltation of Flowers, and it's on view through February 18th, 2024. And Edward Steichen is probably better known as a photographer, one of really the founding, fathers, along with Alfred Stieglitz of, pictorialist photography, early 20th century photography, really the modern art scene in New York City. But he was also a painter, and we have these 3 murals on loan from Art Bridges, who kindly supported this, the program and the exhibition. And they are full of flowers. In fact, as I said, it's called Exaltation of Flowers. They were made as a part of a 7-part series for a townhouse in New York City that belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Meyer. They were actually never installed there. That's a whole other story. And they combine the aesthetics of symbolism and Art Nouveau, and they feature women from the Meyer family and the social circle that Steichen was also in. And he used flowers to really address like the characteristics of his friends. And I'll just have 2 examples here. So in the rose geranium, this is Catherine Rhodes, and she was a New York painter and photographer and one-time love interest of the photographer Alfred Stieglitz. And she's shown with geraniums, and I pasted in a picture of a geranium from the internet. And she formed a geranium club with painter Arthur Carles, and she would write him letters calling him Monsieur Geranium or Mr. Geranium Man, and she signed her name as Geraniumette. And then in this other one, which is the petunia, caladium, budleya, this represents Marion Beckett, another artist who specialized in portraiture and still lifes, and she and Steichen were extremely close and may have even had a romantic relationship. So he put a lot of flowers surrounding her. She was known as Petunia Beckett, and petunias were said to mean desiring the presence of another. And she holds a blue iris, which is associated with the Greek goddess of the rainbow. And then there was also budleya, which is butterfly bush, which is this that's hanging down here. So this is another type of it. And that embodies quiet transformation and rebirth. So that's a little bit of an introduction to that exhibition, which you can see out in the galleries. And I just wanted to, I'm going to let John lead this conversation mostly, but Seongmin, why don't you just start out by telling us when you first started to use flowers in your art, and I can move on to the next slide.
So that one talks.
Well, you don't. If this is not about that, you can start wherever you like.
Okay, so
when you're in school, right, in Korea, did you learn to paint flowers then?
Not really. So the school that I went to has more stronger tradition with ink painting. So we were not really allowed to paint flowers. So it's really later on, recent years, which means about like 10 years ago, when I picked up this specific genre of Korean folk painting from 19th century. That's when I literally first pick up the flower as a subject matter of mine. And that will come up as a part of the conversation. But in order to explain that further, and also to understand my painting better, it is important to understand this perspective that I took from this old Minhwa painting. So I'd like to introduce that first, so that it will open up some kind of insight for you guys. So one on the left is the Korean Minhwa painting, which is Korean folk painting from 19th century, where I got inspiration from, which you can see some configuration of drawer itself looks very much like this old one. One on the right is my painting from one of the, I thought that's the exact same one but that we are showing, but I just made a mistake. But that's the closest one to what we are showing here, the oldest painting among one on view currently at the Sunniban Museum. So it has, can you go to the next slide? I want you to focus on the reverse perspective that I used, and
You want to explain that?
Yes.
Reverse perspective is when you look at something, it gets smaller in the back, right? And she's reversed it, so it gets bigger in the back. So it's a reverse perspective. If you see something in the distance, it's supposed to get smaller, and she's just reversed it. Is that clear?
Well,
Sorry,
she's got the diagram here.
It's the professor in me speaking out.
Yeah, Seongmin.
So
Yeah, the yellow lines aren't part of the painting. She's showing how the perspective lines are going.
So I place the vanishing point in front of the picture plane, not behind of it. So the objects in front are smaller and the back are bigger, which is opposite of the linear perspective that we are very used to. So by doing this way, I was able to create, when I painted the inside of the drawer, I can suggest infinite space
Right.
inside of the space.
Right.
So that's really key to understand my painting, which from here I developed the next body of work, which is titled as Its Inside is Bigger Than Its Outside, which is also the title of the show and my work as well.
Can you use the microphone a little because it's hard to hear? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ready?
You can go to the next.
Don't worry, you can ask us questions.
So the quote of its inside is bigger than its outside. It's a direct quote from Chronicles of Narnia, which we all know it's a children's book.
You know that it's C.S. Lewis, right? He wrote this whole series of novels where these kids go into a closet and they enter another world, a parallel universe. The Lion, Witch, and the Tiger being, I think, the first one. There's, I think, 7 of them. What? There's 7. Oh, that's it, the wardrobe. Thank you. I haven't read the book since I was 11, but so I only remember 2/3. Anyway, that the title for her show comes from those books, and it's about a metaphysical space.
So in that book and also in my work, the wardrobe becomes sort of a portal that connects 2 different worlds.
Right.
So that portal is really taking important role, that it appears in my works for the past 2 decades, and I didn't know, and I that was that obvious, but at one point I realized that really appears taking different shapes, either minimal, conceptual, or abstract, or taking this more specific representation and images. Can you go to the next slide? That's all different kinds of my previous work using portal as a sort of connection that connects 2 different worlds and 2 different perspectives and 2 different ideas.
It's also Asian and Western, right? Because it's minimalism, it's doors, windows, shelves. So it's always about going somewhere else, where minimalism is really about only what's in front of you, right?
Yeah.
What you see is what you see, and you're doing something different.
So
Sorry.
and you can go to the next one. So this is one of the main piece that we are showing. The flower is getting out of the drawer, and if you go to the next slide, you can see the vanishing point is kind of in the middle. So the drawer is getting smaller toward the vanishing point in the center, and the flowers are getting bigger away from the finishing point and coming toward the foreground. So I try to. So it suggests 2 different perspectives, coexistence and openness and connection, and the balance between those ideas. And that's what I try to bring through my artworks. And the flower in this painting has like the peony has been the popular, like really one of my main flowers, and it has its own representation in Asia, which is wealth and prosperity. So I really, it's been really popular flower in the culture, and also in Minhwa, it's dominant genre in it was very popular, and that was the first flower that I picked up from Minhwa, and first flower that I began to paint since I was in college. So it took a long time to get over my own sort of academic limitations from my history, but flower is really such a powerful subject to me. And I have an episode back in New York when I met a curator who is kind of experienced, really well known, and she said, flower, I don't like flower, I don't deal with flowers. Wow. So that point, that kind of shocked me, and she kind of drew the boundary of no flower for me. It's not serious, it's just decorative, pretty, not serious. So I began to like work more seriously about the flower. Why not? Flower can be a subject
Why not
matter.
be defiant?
So since then, not only because of that, I had affection toward the flowers, and but that really motivated me more to like work more with the flowers.
Right. For that, you're told not to paint something, so you, of course, who wouldn't want to paint it instantly?
Teenager defiance.
Yeah, no matter how old you get, you stay that way. Excuse my students, I can say that.
Yeah.
This is a long time ago.
Seongmin, when you have the diagram here, I mean, this is the piece that's in the center of the exhibition, but having it raised up and seeing the diagram, I feel myself bombarded with joy by seeing these flowers like this. So,
coming sort of at you.
Yeah, but in a good way. I don't know if that's your intention because of the meaning of the peonies. I'm feeling like good fortune, like, you know.
Good fortune. So when I first began to paint these peony flowers, I brought that traditional symbol of peony, and I just presented that as is, wealth and prosperity, and wishing that for myself and my audiences as well. And then at one point, I began to develop the ideas more and try to began to incorporate my own narratives and my representation, presenting my paintings in more contemporary context. And then at that point, I really tried to create installation pieces and challenging some traditional forms, which kind of shows up later. And before we going to there, if you go to the next slide, this is the installation part.
Right, the flowers have finally escaped the frame, right?
Had you seen some of these pieces before?
No, I had not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, you know, a painting is like a container, and then of course there's artists that don't want to be contained by the container. You know, Lucio Fontana cutting the can, you know, just different ways to open the painting up. And here's another way, right? The flowers have drifted out of the painting into your life. According to Clement Greenberg, painting changed because painting was a window that you looked into, right? So into another world. But then when Jackson Pollock made his poured paintings, the painting existed in the same space as the viewer. And here's another kind of exploration of the painting existing in the same space as the viewer, right? Because the paintings, the flowers drifted out in front of the painting. into the space where you're standing. Sorry, it's the professor in me.
That was really beautiful. I love to hear that. So my own way of break my boundaries and try to challenge the convention, what's out there, and that's what I try to do. And thank you for bringing that up. And so in connection to the reverse perspective, I can tell you the next slide with the diagram how this movement sort of goes and flow around. So the vanishing point in the center, I introduced two different perspectives looking at this point from all diverse perspectives. And it looks a static painting without this explanation, but once you are aware of this, there's a movement flow around, and it like really occupies the whole space of the wall that we install this piece. Yeah. And ideally, I wanted to create the peonies a lot bigger, but I had technical. I'm gonna be honest with you. I had some technical difficulties back then. I had to create that in very short time. But in the end, the idea is getting a lot bigger in front so that that dramatic change brings a lot more clear idea of how this reverse perspective works in the work.
Well, it was a lot of fun and inspiring for us to work with you on this, to choose these works, and then Seongmin was continually getting inspired to think of how to make this installation in the space. And I love the way that it also bridges like painting and decorative art, because each flower it's like a painting, but it's also like almost like a concrete decorative piece of decorative art. And then we have furniture in the paintings, and so all these arts are in conversation with each other, I feel like.
The idea of adding that piece later was, this painting was from 2016, and Hudson River Museum sort of chose my relatively older work when I developed my work a lot further after this for the past 6-8 years. So with my ambition and passion. So I wanted to sort of reflect what I'm working on currently with my old piece. So as an artist, it wasn't like really pleasing just to hang my old piece in a series. So I wanted to create something new that speaks in the space. So that was.
So it uses different technology.
Yes, and also within that time, I began to polish my techniques with Adobe softwares and try different technologies such as vinyl colors and laser colors. So this whole thing is not just the painting on the wood. I had to build up these techniques and the skills in order to create this one.
Right.
So it's underneath of it, like really reflecting what's new languages and materials and techniques available for artists. Like keep developing and polishing what I can do.
Right. So it's not nostalgic for Min Ah, right? It's breaking. It's actually extending and breaking with the tradition, rather than looking back and being nostalgic, which I think is important to kind of recognize about your work.
Yeah. And
you want to tell them what the middle one is?
the middle one. Okay.
Or at least what you said to me, you might change your mind and not tell me.
So the plum is the plum was introduced, a symbol of hope and the spring, and at the same time it's one of the four gracious plants
Right.
from Asian culture.
Right.
So it represents nobleman, and this four virtue of the nobleman should have. So,
Right. So and it's one of the four representations of a way a gentleman can be noble. That's what it symbolizes. Okay. So that's why it's important to know that because of what she's done.
So I wanted to bring that notion, that symbols here. So and then further develop this flower of a plum blossom. We go to the next. So this one on the left is the details of the plum blossom, the center panel from the previous image, and then and I keep developing this using this flower subject and trying to incorporate with some ideas and narrations and some messages. And the gun on the right is from 2022. It's a Mussolini's gun transforming into this plum tree, which symbolizes the nobleman. So it's a sort of protest for this power that is used in an abusive way. So it's sort of the visual letter to dictators or someone who uses the powers in bad ways. By incorporating these opposite, contrasting subjects, and I try to create some connections and also bring the deeper meanings of a flower.
Good.
And this is going back to my first flower piece that I created.
And is yours on mulberry paper too?
It's on mulberry paper too.
So mulberry paper is typically in Asia, people paint on paper rather than on canvas. So she's gone back to that tradition, but updated it with her own flower.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So one on the right is a very typical Minhwa painting. As you can see, a lot of peony flowers really occupy the whole screen. So this was just the first flower that I painted in my life as an artist, professional artist. And as you can see, the basic designs and materials and techniques are same as the old Minhwa painting, but I just reconfigured to convert this 4-panel screen peony painting into modern bouquet.
Right.
And at this point, I present the peony as the very typical symbol as wealth and prosperity.
Right.
And I was more solely focused on visually presenting this work, looking more modern, only using the traditional iconic images.
Right.
And then after this, I began to incorporate my narratives and some representations.
So that's you.
Yeah, that's me. It's called a portrait of peony, but it's a portrait of myself as well. And I took the 8-panel format from the 8-panel peony screen paintings, and also Asian paint read from right to left. So when you read this painting from right to left, that empty spot, the missing spot, goes around counterclockwise.
Right.
So, which means I am rewinding a clock of my life, looking back.
Right.
and it's a retrospective piece that looking back of my collective sensory experiences and my scars and my memories and all those. And I really want to present this painting, the flower with missing part. It's incomplete, but I regard that my life beautiful as it is, whether it's complete or incomplete, perfect or imperfect. And I like to ask open-ended question to my audiences. What are yours? What about you?
Right. Okay, that's good. So you were trying to get the audience to kind of reflect on their own life.
Mm-hmm. I have my own ideas to build by building and developing a work, but I always like to suggest that to audience and leave it open-ended. And I rather like to hear from audiences what they think.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Did the background colors have any particular symbolism?
No,
like
not at that point. I just pick all different ranges of colors to represent all different colors of our life.
Right.
And after later on, I began to use the symbolism of colors, emotions of colors more actively, but not with this one.
Now this is kind of blowing my mind. Did you show these two series in the same gallery together?
Not well. The first I wanted to present that as a set, and then it was hard to find the place all the time. It was really wide piece, so I had to break it down to show and sell. And when I do that, it was more stronger as a pair. So at that point, I wanted to present as a pair.
Yeah, but until you put them together like this, I didn't notice that they were mirroring each other. When I saw the whole set and then the other whole set, yeah.
So they were, in original installations, they were looking at each other on the opposite words so that they can speak each other.
Right, that's what I meant. Were they yeah.
And that point, between that and that, I heard what the curator said previously about the flower. So I really wanted to push myself further with this flower subject. So in this work, I wanted to really challenge the traditionalism by deconstructing this form of scroll.
Right.
By deconstructing and reinventing and presenting that as contemporary installation pieces. So I had a lot of episodes around this, and I had a lot of conversation with my framer if that is structurally possible and how much I could cut out in order to keep the shape.
Right.
So that was the maximum. The one on the left was the maximum that I could cut out. And so for
interesting.
For this series, I really wanted to wanted to expand the representation of peony from me to us, and it's a portrait of us, portrait of ourselves in this bigger context, in more capitalized word, in which we dream, achieve, and hurt, and leave some scars, and transcend in the end. So I also conceptualized the notion of that as well. So the ribbon in the center It's very typical ribbon that is used for funeral bouquet, and the flowers, peony flowers, are in full bloom, but it's sharply cut up and fallen onto the ground.
Right.
And the design of the scroll with that dark, almost black silk around it is from Sobyong. You can see the next image. Maybe next.
Oh wait, you should show. I mean, this is really amazing how much has been cut out, right?
Mm-hmm. And when the scroll is supposed to be rolled up to store and unrolled, and it coats. It naturally creates this coat. So it's a flat painting,
Right.
but it creates this kind of sculptural
Because it curls.
images because of the curves.
Right.
And if you go to the next, you can see the one more. You can see this sobyong, which is used for funeral.
Right.
So I took the format of this screen to make my scroll painting, scroll installations. So that screen is placed in the funeral house, and coffin is usually placed behind.
Right.
The
So then
scroll.
people go around and look at the coffin.
Well, not back then, because we didn't have that tradition in
Right,
Asia.
right.
And it's just there, symbolically there, and the offerings in front of it.
Ah.
So
So
that-
it's like they've already gone to the other side. Right? I mean, right? Literally.
I think we had more different conceptions about the dead bodies. So unlike the Western culture, we didn't display.
Didn't
The
display it.
curse.
Right. Okay.
It was more in the form of the respect that we don't really see the dead body.
Right.
So the scroll and the screen itself sort of serves as a divider between life and
Right.
death.
Death. Right.
And I wanted to bring the idea of that in that previous work, but not in negative way. That is not the end of a life.
Right. Right.
It's another beginning of
Right.
a spiritual journey, and I wanted to bring some positive aspects of it through this work. And
Yeah.
if you go back a little bit, and one more, I hit the next.
Next one back.
The next. No, not
Okay,
the
forward.
Forward. Thank you.
This one.
Yeah, here I like to quote what Lao Tzu says in his book. So, in order to feel, one must empty oneself
Right.
first. So, I really like to bring this philosophical notion of emptiness from
Right.
Asian culture in association with that as well. So
Right.
it's
Because
not.
it's different.
Mhm.
The notion of emptiness in Asia is different than the notion of emptiness in the West. Right? So,
Yeah.
because in Asia you can be refilled, and the West is sort of more bleak.
Mhm.
I would say you're empty is a more negative thing. It's not negative in Asia, I don't think.
It's more. It's not just empty and vacant. It's full of energy.
Right. Potential.
But at the same time, I really associate that emptiness with the modern physics, quantum physics.
Physics,
So in quantums, which I also refer a lot in my paintings, it's a matter. But when you break down here, this one into molecules and atoms, it still matter. But when it break it down even smaller particles as
Right.
subatomic particles,
Right.
you find this it doesn't appear as a matter. It's a field of
Field,
energy with
Right.
like really vibrant energy, which looks it's a field but it's empty.
Right.
So matter is energy and field at the same time, which I also like to bring up through my previous painting from the river, it's inside, outside piece. Because I have this notion of dualism in there. Can we go back to
Sure,
there?
sure.
I'm sorry to go back and forth.
Don't
But
worry. Life is
for
not a
one
straight
more.
line.
Yeah. And one before, and two before. The one more. The one next one, the fourth.
Sorry.
More. Okay, here. So I have this notion of dualism here, depending on where I place the vanishing point. I can sort of play around. Sometimes this appears as an object, sometimes as a space. If you look at one on the left, the vanishing point matches with the bottom line. So you create this whole bottom line straight, horizontal. So if you have no idea about reverse perspective, this may appear to you as a space with a drawer on the work. And it creates sort of that illusion and suggests that dualistic aspect. It's an object and space at the same time. So when I first painted this, I painted drawer as an object, but at the same time, I suggested that as a wide space inside of the drawer.
Right, the sky, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sky inside the drawer,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sky and also inside of the drawer space, as I said earlier, it implies infinite space as I applied different kinds of perspective. And I also associate that with quantum physics.
Right.
It's an object at the same time. It's a space.
Space, right.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I also see as emptiness is
Oh,
and
okay.
in connection with the
Right, so you're connecting quantum physics to Asian philosophy,
yes.
just in case any of you are wondering.
We actually were talking about this when we were working on the labels, right?
Yes.
Let's see. I think there were a couple more, right?
Yeah. So
Do you want to mention what this is?
okay. So that's another portal actually. That's another portal taking this rock formation, which is very typical scholars rock
Rock.
from Ming Dynasty, and that serves as a sort of entrance going toward this world, what's the fantasy world on top. And that's also how you read some Asian landscape painting as well. There's always some entry point, and you kind of explores in that landscape. So that's sort of the map that I offered here. And in this work, peony represent femininity and yin, and mountain represent masculinity and yang. And its subtitle is a love story, and they met and merged, synthesized, and grow together out of this bizarre rock formation. So in this work, I wanted to present this fragile and weak, can appear as a weak flowers, as a grand figure. I really wanted to empower this weak and fragile, and by make it grand and gigantic.
Because that rock could never support all those flowers.
Or mountains. I mean, now that I'm,
And
you
then
have
the
to look
mountains
close.
on the top, right.
I love that your work makes us look close on that.
Mm-hmm.
It makes us look closely.
Yes,
Because the more we look, the more we see.
And I wanted to also bring out different natures that's hidden behind us. Flower is not always fragile and weak. It can be very powerful emotionally and psychologically. It can bring like such a good positive energy to us. And also the mountain, or some fierce animal that I incorporate in my other paintings. They are not always fierce. They can have some gentle nature in them as well. So I wanted to sort of bring out some hidden nature of all of us and try to balance things out. And if you go to the next, you can see my recent piece with small, tiny tigers in grand field of flowers. So
and these are the very new ones, right?
It's pretty new one. So it became more colorful.
Yeah.
As well. So like I try to portray and present flowers in different ways in different contexts. So some are more decorative and pretty, and some are more philosophical and conceptual, and I'm pretty versatile to go around here and there.
These make me think of whole worlds. If an animal can fit on the flower,
The bird on the left is a phoenix. It's a legendary flower, represented to be birds. So they are very important symbolic animals, and tiger in Korean culture is very it's a king of animal, and it really represents something powerful.
Right, because there's no lions in
Asia.
So tiger is the kind of the king of animals.
Yeah, and it's about like how I want to see and present and interpret in diverse different perspectives.
Seongmin, do you think people could ask you a few questions?
Of course.
Anybody have any questions for Seongmin or for John? Yeah.
Random first.
Mulberry paper, raspberry paper, where can that be found in New York?
Mulberry paper and rice paper.
Mulberry paper,
Rice paper. Okay, so to be exact, there's no such a thing as rice paper.
Right.
It's just
misunderstanding.
So we don't really. Well, you can make paper with rice, but it's not really good quality to paint on.
But where could you
the
buy
mulberry paper, I get my materials from Korea. But I found some mulberry papers in Chinatown, and also there's some websites that you can get mulberry papers. Okay, first.
In reference to the rice paper, I think that's something that's used in cooking. It's may have rice paper, and then they wrap foods up in it, and it might be called rice paper, if I can recollect. But I had a question about the Mussolini painting. I wasn't sure, what was that trying to depict?
It's the gun that Mussolini had, and then if you look at the painting on the far right, you see the gun like this becoming a tree, right? It's like the swords and the plowshares. How do you change a weapon into something that's not a weapon? Or how do you have a wish for that?
Because I felt maybe what was trying to be depicted is, despite whatever went on then, still there was beauty in the environment in which he came and did whatever he did. So I was just wondering if that's what you were trying to show, despite that time and what went on, there was still beauty.
Okay, not exactly. That was not my idea. What I presented through the painting was that the one with the power, was the one who has to transform into something peaceful, or someone
right, can
peaceful.
The dictator become someone else, right?
So it's a transformation. Like, it's a visual letter to those dictators, and I used a gun that used to belong to Mussolini and Hitler, and I want to expand that into some other objects that tells of modern times.
Yeah, negate their power.
Yeah.
That's how I take those pieces. It's refusing the power of the gun and turning it into something else. Could I ask John a question?
Sure.
I've always, we were talking about this before, been very curious that you're a poet. Is there some way you think you approach looking at art, whether it's Seongmin's art or other art, from the point of view of a poet?
Well, I think most poets don't have an agenda. So if you're you take art criticism, or there's a lot of art critics that have a kind of theory about what art should be, or how it should work, or what makes it important. And I think in a way that became very, it left a lot of people out. It left people of color out, it left women out, the kind of theory of, say, formalism that was against biography and autobiography. And I think as a poet, autobiography doesn't necessarily show up transparently in a poem, but you can't really write a poem that's not autobiographical in some way, right? So it becomes more complicated, the relationship. And I think in a way, as an art critic, it was something I thought about. And for Seongmin, she tells you that this is the first painting that she painted with flowers, but she doesn't make it anecdotal, right? You know, she's not painting a painting where you see her painting the flower. It's not autobiographical in a diaristic way, but it is still autobiographical. And that's like what I think is important. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I like it. And we were talking before because I was very familiar with John's work because he's been writing criticism for many years and about many artists that I admire. And you said that the editor of, was it Art News, hired poets on purpose,
right,
as art critics. And I thought that was very interesting. So,
because we're good at description. Or we should be. Yes?
She mentioned before about 4 flowers in Asian culture that are very important. Just wondering what those 4
What are the other 3? So it's plum,
Plum, chrysanthemum.
chrysanthemum.
So those 2 are flower, and bamboo and orchid. Orchid has flower, but we mostly painted. We paint both. So orchid, plum blossom, chrysanthemum, and bamboo.
Right.
Yes.
What is the consistency of the mulberry paper?
Excuse me?
The consistency of the mulberry paper. Is it very thick paper or
Does it have to be?
That they produce different thickness. So it's basically 1 ply, 2 ply, 3 ply. So like depending on how many layers, you can get pretty thick and strong. It's as strong as the canvas.
one question? The ink that you use, is that Korean ink or is it?
It's I use Korean-made ink, but it's basically same ink that Chinese and Japanese and Korean make. It's a charcoal-based black ink.
Mostly brush and what pen? Do you use any pen in your?
No pen so far, just a brush. But I have like wide ranges of brush from like really thin, 1 millimeter, like 1/8 or 1/16, to wide flat hake brush.
Well, I want to tell a story. So I have a friend who's American. Was a student of mine, but not in the same class as American, who has spent the last 30 years going to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam to teach English. But now she's working at the George O'Keeffe Museum in Abiquiu. And so she and I and another friend of mine from Santa Fe were talking. The other person said, oh, but you could like teach a calligraphy class over one weekend. And my friend said, no, I can't. And this woman who said, no, I can't, has actually won contests in Korea for her calligraphy. And her name is Julia Haywood. And whenever she appears on the stage, usually it's a contest run by a Buddhist temple. Most of the Buddhist monks practically faint because there's this tall American woman. What is she doing here, right? Anyway, the person said, why can't you just teach a beginning calligraphy class? And my friend said, because you have to spend about 1 month learning how to make a vertical stroke, practicing 6 hours a day. And then my other person said, oh. So that precision, you see in her work.
Yeah, to give you some idea of the mulberry paper, if you look closely, obviously you cannot touch them because they're on view at the museum, but you will see that the paintings the paper is wrapped around a stretcher as a canvas would be.
Right.
The backs of the paintings are beautiful. They're so carefully made and put together, but it is a very thick paper, I would imagine, because it's wrapped around a stretcher like a painting.
And in oil painting on canvas, you can scrape it away and do it again, but in painting and ink on paper, you cannot do it again. If you do it wrong, you have to start all over.
It's not forgiving.
It's right. It's unforgiving. It's a very unforgiving material. Yes?
I was just wondering on the background colors, was there any special significance to the colors that you chose?
Each time when I wanted to paint the background colors, I really focus on what I feel and what kind of emotion that I like to bring through each painting. So for this, for the plum blossom at the Grand View, at the Hudson River Museum, I wanted to create some open space. So that's why I painted the light sky blue. And for red one, when I choose red one, I wanted to bring like a lot of energy. And that also in Chinese culture, it brings a lot of fortune and money and luck. So,
Right. If you've been to a Chinese wedding, you're supposed to bring money in a red envelope. So when I invite you to one, you'll know what to do.
So like each time, and also not only that symbolism from cultural context, I also brings my own emotion as well. So sometimes I use orange, not much of yellow, and very light green, like very tinted teal.
Right.
So so it really depends on my emotion and the context of each painting. Yes.
Laura, would you mind going back to the beginning slide, please? The one with the peonies that are falling out into our space. Like that. Yeah, this one. Okay. I just have to say, I've been looking at your work for years, but at this particular installation for months upon months. I mean, at the tours, which we're talking about. Seeing this, and actually the next one also with the, illustrating the vanishing point. You spoke before about kind of a correlation between Eastern philosophy and quantum physics, and it seems to me that there is so much transgression and contradiction and simultaneity in this work because you've got you've reversed the vanishing point, so everything should be getting larger in the back. But now that I see this in 2 dimensions, and I'm not looking at it as decorative objects or sculptures, right? It's also getting bigger
Right.
in the real space. So you've broken down the boundaries between not only that space, but also space in front. So this is all to say, are there more underpinnings, and this is a question for both of you really, underpinnings of Eastern philosophy that feeling of, it's almost like that, I don't want to say that maybe it's a sin in a sense that there's that moment when everything's happening at the same time. Are there more underpinnings in Eastern philosophy for what's happening in this sort of clashing of different dimensions at the same, together at the same time?
Do you have?
I have a theory.
Okay.
Seongmin came to the United States when she was relatively mature, so she's really part of two countries. But in a way, I often think that people who live in the diaspora are both part of two countries and not part of two countries. So there's not a place where you feel entirely comfortable. And I think that comes into the work, again, without being anecdotal. But there is a kind of slight discomfort in the work because we don't know where we're standing, literally. And if you think about that and then apply it to someone living in the diaspora, they don't literally know where they're standing, right? There's a kind of constant insecurity. And I think, and you don't want to make a giant thing out of it, because then it makes you into a victim, but you can't overlook it. And I think that's, whether she'll say that or not, I think it's in her work.
Wow. It's really wow. That's what I exactly feel about me. Like apart from the work, I always feel that insecurity and also not really fixed in one point or one time. So I really go around and looking for something else and looking back, looking forward, looking where I am. So I guess my work really shows all of these elements together.
Right.
And I think I'm in the process of figuring things out. Who am I and where I am going to go from here. So it's thank you for the question.
I think, Masha, did you have a question?
Actually, they both just answered it. Actually, can I add one? A question. The title, it's inside is bigger than it's outside. It's from the Chronicles of Narnia. And I recall you talking about the importance of the books that your daughter was bringing into your home. Could you talk about how that played a role in your own life and how it's manifested itself in your artwork?
So when I came to US when I was 27, and John was when I came to my graduate school there after finishing my first graduate school in Korea, and John was the professor back then. So that's 25 years ago. And do you remember my English was so horrible?
It was terrible. And the thing, and she was very shy, so it was really hard to get her to talk. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to be pushy, so it's like, how do I get this person to tell me something? And it was complicated. It was interesting. And I mean, I like teaching in a situation where I have to readjust what my experience, how I think about who the person is. I did go home and curse at times, like, you should talk more. So
I do that myself as a teacher now. So it took me a long time for me to overcome the shyness, and it's not only about being shy, also about languages and content as well. It's when I look back then, it's not that I just couldn't speak English. I also didn't have enough content to talk about, and the confidence on top of that big child. And since I came later as an adult, I had
She's
this
also
whole
older than most of the other students.
few years older.
Okay, just a few.
Since I came as an adult, the whole childhood experience and teenage experience was missing. So when I raised my own daughter, I began to read her books from alphabet up to like 12 years old, up to the point that she refused to talk about whatever with me. Chronicles of Narnia was one of those books that I read. I literally read 95% of all the children's books. That's how I learned American culture, American history from this children's point of view. And also when I read this children's book as an adult, I can go deeper with it. And that's what I picked up from this amazing children's book. And so like that, not only this book, there are a lot of other books that like really hooked me up into American culture and history, including the African American history as well. There's a book that I could recall, Ashes. Do you remember Ashes? It's about a slave girl's life from her point of view, and it was a beautiful book that I really get to know about a girl and the history behind through this
It's so interesting.
So it was the literature is amazing, and yes, does that answer the question?
Because some people learn English through watching television. They can repeat whole commercials and things like that. I mean, it's interesting where you learn and how you learn English.
I think I took all different platforms, also books, and I recently listened to CNN a lot, and also the articles in hyperallergic. That's a way to learn English as well. Yes.
You mentioned that you kind of reversed the use of screens or was non-traditional. I'm just wondering, did you get any criticism on that?
You mean the scroll painting?
Yes.
The deconstructing? Oh, luckily, no. I was kind of worried about this conservative Korean artist or art critic kind of to at me, but no. Maybe I didn't get enough attention to it.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Thanks.
And just listening to this, it really points out some of the sayings where you say you have to have an open mind. And so when she spoke, I believe it was a teacher telling you, oh, flowers, I don't want to deal with the flowers. Because you had a background in understanding all this other stuff in terms of art, you could then reverse everything. And then when you said read from right to left, then that means if you can read from right to left, then I'm going to change the perspective that everyone is taught in art.
Right.
I'm going to change it around because already that's part of her culture. So I found this very interesting. Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a lovely note on which to end. And I would just like to thank our wonderful guests, Seongmin Ahn and John Yau.